Hi everyone, it's Guillaume from Startup Basecamp. Welcome to the Tech for Climate podcast. During the show, you will have the opportunity to meet the best climate tech founders, investors, and experts from both Silicon Valley and around the globe. They will share with you their stories and personal journeys into this growing and exciting industry, giving you some insight into the ecosystems that help you to take part in the fight against climate change and benefit from the opportunities it can represent. The podcast is divided in two small interviews. So in the first part, you will get to know our speakers, their perspectives on the climate crisis and how climate tech is changing the game. The second part of the discussion will be for members of our community who will learn the speakers' secret sauce on how to and share with you their unique expertise on topics such as fundraising, management, strategy, and so on, to help you to become a better leader in your field. So before we start, I would like to quickly share what we are doing at Startup Basecamp to support climate tech founders in accessing resources and gaining visibility with investors they seek. Our initiatives include a membership-based community platform offering access to a dedicated Slack group with a growing number of founders, experts, and investors from around the world, and a series of exclusive content such as interviews, weekly job listings, events, and our quarterly online pitch of night opportunity. But more than a place where you can learn, exchange, and grow, we are building a matchmaking service to facilitate connections between our members and top investors and experts in the field. And soon, alongside with other top investors, we will be launching a small fund to co-invest in the growth and acceleration of our members. Finally, all of this is possible because of your support and donations. We are a small self-funded team, and we want you to be part of this collective movement against climate change. So please share one episode with a friend and subscribe to the channels. As an added bonus, we will plant a tree for each of our subscribers each time we reach 1,000 new fans or donors. Do not hesitate to connect with me via social media or email guillaume@startupbasecamp. Thanks a lot for listening. I hope to get in touch with you soon. And now, let's go for the show. Hi everyone, in today's episode we're speaking with Nadav Steinmetz, founder and CEO at Nomea Ventures. Nomea is a UK-based climate tech fund that invests in transformative technologies that advance the transformation to net zero emissions. They particularly focus on startups within the UK, Europe and Israel ecosystem and invest in both early and late stage companies, helping them grow into highly profitable and successful enterprises. It was fascinating to talk with Nadav. He's a Franco-Israeli, yet spent much of his career in the US and the UK, and first considered impact when he founded an NGO as a student. 2 years ago, he left the financial sector to found Nomea Ventures and truly focus on climate tech on the premise that it was the sector that would provide the most impact. In founding Nomea Ventures, Nadav became an expert in battery technologies. He takes us on a journey during the show across the global battery market in an attempt to understand what are its main drivers, what it would take for Europe to catch up on the Asian market, and how batteries can become more sustainable amidst this electrification revolution. In doing so, we learn more about Nomea Venture and their founding premise, what type of investment they make, what they are excited about, and how you can get involved. In the second part of the show, Nadav explains 2 tips for founders who are fundraising. He also gives a controversial opinion on why work-life balance is overrated. Nadav, welcome to the show. Hi Nadav, welcome to the Tech for Climate podcast. I'm super excited to have you here with us today. I believe it's going to be a great opportunity to hear your story and really understand what you guys are up to right now with Nomea Investments. So welcome to the show.
Fantastic. It's a pleasure to be here, Guillaume.
So as usual, is the tradition here. Before we start, could you please give us a 30-second introduction about Nomea Investments?
Absolutely. So we are a UK-based climate tech fund that invests in transformative technologies that advance the transition to net zero emissions. We focus on the UK, on Europe, and in Israel, and we invest in both early and late stage companies, helping them grow into highly profitable and successful enterprises.
So let's start from the top. Can you tell us a bit more about your personal story and background? What are you passionate about besides supporting and investing in climate tech founders? I mean, what makes you feel inspired or your best self? As I always ask, like, who's Nadav?
That's okay. That's a very deep question to start with. So I'll start with who is Nadav. First of all, I'm a husband, soon to become a father in the coming weeks.
Congratulations.
For a daughter, so my wife and I are excited. Thank you very much. But in terms of my personal story and how I got into climate tech, is that as the listeners and you can probably hear, I'm not English, we're based in London, but I'm half French, half Israeli. I've lived most of my life in Israel. At a certain point, I've decided that I'd like to explore the world and moving somewhere else. I moved to New York. I did my education at Columbia University. I studied economics and philosophy. I also co-founded a non-profit organization that is called One for the World at Columbia that encourages students and young professionals to pledge 1% of their future income to charity. Why future? Because unfortunately, as students, we realize that we don't have an income, but just by attending those top universities like Columbia, Princeton, Yale, Harvard, and others, but not just in the States, also elsewhere. So in Europe and Australia, we can have a huge impact post-graduation and help people who live in extreme poverty conditions. So I got involved with that, and this I started thinking already about impact and how I can use my personal resources and skill set and energy and time into improving the world. I started working in financial services. I've worked in a few different places. I'm not going to bore you with all the details, but I've worked at Blackstone, a big private equity group, and I've worked in 2 other family offices doing leverage buyouts and different types of investments. 2 years ago, I had a special moment, and I've decided this is my time to launch a climate tech fund and invest in companies that I think are disruptive and can become hugely profitable and have a massive climate impact. I moved to London, and then the rest is history, as you say.
Fantastic. So tell us about those different work-life experiences. I mean, you're from the financial world, like working with Blackstone. Maybe if you can record 1 or 2 pieces of experiences that you gain and in a way gave you an edge to start a firm.
So working in financial services and specifically in private equity, it's a great school. That's how I look at it. And it gives you a great skill set and understanding of how to analyze an investment and go through a certain due diligence process and different types of valuation methods. Now, by going and working in some of the big financial institutions or big private equity groups, they focus quite a lot on fundamentals. So they just don't look only specifically on a specific investment, but what are the fundamentals within the market in terms of growth, in terms of trends. And this is something that I've also applied to climate tech. So we're quite of thematic investors because climate, it's many different verticals. This is the challenge, but it's also the opportunity. So from industry and materials to ag and food, to transportation, to digital. So we focus on several themes that we think that the fundamentals are very strong and will only become stronger within time.
So you mentioned prior to a bit earlier in the conversation that you had this special moment before launching the fund, but you didn't elaborate too much on that. Could you maybe tell us this aha moment that you had, if you can define it as such, that in a way motivate you to launch this climate tech fund and really have this climate angle?
I've had a few aha moments, I assume like other investors or entrepreneurs throughout my career. The first one was going back as a student. And as a student, you get sometimes very philosophical and you think about your purpose and what you want to do with your life and invest your time and career. And as I was working and encouraging other young students and professionals to embrace effective giving and think about helping people who live in extreme poverty, the definition by the World Bank is under $1.90 per day. Unbelievable, us who live in the Western world, it's difficult to imagine and grasp that. And what I realized, that first of all, the population who live in extreme poverty conditions, mostly in Southeast Asia or Sub-Saharan Africa, these are the people who are going to be affected the most by climate change. So when we're thinking about even what happened here in the UK over 2 months ago, on July 19th, 2.5 months ago, temperatures in London has hit over 40 degrees. This was the hottest recorded day in the history of the UK. The previous one was in 2019, when temperatures hit over 38 degrees. For the people who live in the Middle East or elsewhere, it might not seem very high, but relative to the UK, it's extremely unusual. The UK Met Office has announced a non-essential travel warning. Most public transportation and homes are devoid of cooling systems. So the UK government has really asked people to stay indoors. All of this has a real economic impact. And in the future, those heat waves are only going to increase in frequency and in intensity. And going back to what I said earlier, the population and the people who are going to be affected the most by the impact of climate change are people who live in extreme poverty. So that was my first aha moment. I had many others along the way that I'll be happy to share if you're interested, but that was the first one.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So let's take maybe a zoom out and take a step back. Prior to the conversation, when we spoke together, you mentioned that you would be interested to share with us your insights regarding the battery and energy storage ecosystem and the potential to contribute to the fight against climate change today. So maybe you can start by giving us some data points regarding the battery landscape.
Absolutely. What we're seeing today in the world, and probably every morning when you open the FT or Bloomberg, you can see the big news, but we're seeing a battery EV boom. I mean, I cannot give a good example or comparison, but there is an unprecedented manufacturing expansion and logistical expansion towards building battery gigafactories. OEMs, car manufacturers, are transitioning from making internal combustion engine cars to electric vehicles. We can all see the regulation in Europe or also elsewhere. Car manufacturers will stop selling engine cars after 2030, some of them after 2035. So electrification is not a trend. Let me be clear. It's not a trend, it's a revolution. And batteries, going back to your question, batteries are really at the forefront of the world's electrification. So let's maybe go a little bit deeper in terms of the lithium-ion batteries that you need for electric vehicles and why the batteries are the ones that make the cars. First of all, when somebody, a customer, you, myself, others who are listening to the show are thinking about buying an electric vehicle, you mostly ask yourself two questions. One is about range. How long can the car drive and can that compete with internal combustion engine? The second one is about charging time. I don't want to be stopped in a fueling station where I can fuel in 5 minutes my traditional combustion car versus a 30 minutes wait where I might be late for a meeting or meeting a friend, and etc. and etc. And the third is, of course, cost, but electric vehicles are very close to price parity with internal combustion engine cars. My personal opinion that we're going to reach it in the next 2 years, perhaps. So going back, it's range, charging time, and cost. Now the range is correlated directly with what we call energy density. What is the energy density of the battery? And then we have to dig deeper. We have to speak about the two major competing chemistries. You have LFP, lithium ferrophosphate, which in reality is a big chunk of iron, right? Ferro, iron. And you have NMC, nickel, manganese, cobalt. Each one of them offer a different type of properties. So LFP is cheaper to produce, better thermal stability. Ferro, iron is relatively earth abundant, but the energy density is much lower. So the range is shorter. NMC is the opposite. High energy density, but expensive to produce, and will probably be applicable to premium cars or bigger cars that require those types of properties. This is probably a good starting point for our discussion.
Definitely. If you can maybe give us like a little bit like, how many of them are produced as of today? I mean, probably very correlated to the amount of electric EVs that we put on the road. But what are maybe like, the innovation that you see coming into these traditional EVs, batteries, chemical-based storage, I would say. Do you see like new innovation? Because clearly extending the range is, as you mentioned, one of the three components to motivate the consumers to move towards this type of solution. So if you can just tell us a bit more like who is working on that, and what are the innovations that are upcoming and still cooking in the labs that you probably have seen so far?
Certainly. First of all, I'm super excited about what's happening in the battery sector. We see a lot of new innovation. In the past 2-3 years with the SPAC boom and so much capital has been coming into new battery technologies and new types of innovations that will increase the energy density and really optimize for the next generation of batteries. I can maybe elaborate in a few moments. But in terms of the existing landscape, I mean, the 10 biggest producers of batteries are Asian. The biggest ones are Chinese, CATL, BYD. I believe together they're probably responsible for over 50% of the production of batteries. And this is putting aside the battery minerals that go into the batteries, where probably Chinese players are responsible for over 80% of the production and processing of those minerals. And you also have very big battery manufacturers in South Korea that we all know them, in Japan. So the market is really dominated by them. We see new players, ambitious ones, but new, that rise in Europe, like Northvolt and others, but they're absolutely very far away from the capacity and production of the big Asian players. The last thing that I would add that is correlated is that it's so interesting to see the new players who are getting involved. Today, car manufacturers are super hands-on in terms of getting the right batteries into their cars. They're realizing what I said at the beginning, that the battery is what is making the car. So we all saw with Tesla and Panasonic, and Tesla became very successful with their NCA chemistry type of battery. But many others like GM, Volkswagen is even going to produce battery themselves in-house. So this is a very interesting shift to monitor.
And I'd like to double click on this relation between this Asian domination of the market versus the EU, as you just mentioned with Volkswagen, for instance, EU-based car manufacturing, but also the US. So maybe you can share with us like what is the EU advantages and weaknesses in regards of the battery tech innovation and production. I mean, how do you compare versus China? Do you see like any major roadblocks to accelerate that and in a way take back this domination from the Asian landscape? Do you have like any major roadblocks that you identified? I mean, do we need new policies maybe to be put in place, or is it like lack of funding or maybe lack of innovation and R&D centers? I mean, what needs to happen for you, according to you, like to accelerate this movement and go mainstream? And in a way, what is the realistic timeline? Because all of those capex, intensity to put all the production in place takes time as well. So tell us a bit more about this large question that we have for you.
I don't think there's a lack of innovation in Europe or in North America or even elsewhere at all. I do think that in Europe there was a lack of investment for a period of time, a lack of investment, but the innovation, the work that is being done in different academies and universities is absolutely amazing. In terms of policy, and then I'll go back to innovations, but in terms of policy, climate legislation is getting much better. So in Europe, we're talking about the European Green Deal, but in the States, quite recently, we all saw in the news the Inflation Reduction Act that the US government, the Biden administration has announced. So this is a $370 billion climate and tax bill that will give long-term incentives to climate technologies. Specifically for batteries, they have about $30 billion of a program. The IRA are announcing and producing all those numbers, so the listeners can check it out online if they're interested. But in terms of innovations, we see a lot in Europe and also elsewhere. So we're talking about solid state. So for example, today, the typical lithium-ion battery, you have an anode and a cathode. In the anode, you have graphite. In the future, it might change to silicon. Again, going back to the energy density. In the electrolyte, all of them use a liquid electrolyte, but the shift is clear. And maybe a decade from now, I know that I might get some critiques because others think before. I may be more conservative here, but a decade from now, the liquid electrolyte will change into solid state. And then you have the cathode, which goes back to the LFP versus NMC. So we see a lot of new innovation from solid state, silicon anode. You probably have 40 companies only in the silicon anode space. And solid state, there are many of them. There's the famous ones that we all know that have raised a lot of capital, like QuantumScape and others, that became quite public. But there's also many other early stage, very innovative.
So in terms of production in itself, I mean, do you think that Southeast Asia and China in general have, they have like this competitive advantage that we don't have in the EU market today? Again, maybe some regulation are in place that are too the constraints in terms of the regulation on the European market are stronger and harder onto the companies regarding the Asian market. I mean, what is this, I would say, difference that you see that makes China and Southeast Asia like more competitive in terms of production in itself? And what is missing for the European to catch up on?
So there's many aspects, but I will touch on two. So the first one, they were very quick to make big moves. So if I go back to the two major competing chemistries in lithium ion, LFP versus NMC, they were very quick to test those chemistries, to provide incentives to car manufacturers and battery manufacturers to use them. They provide very strong incentives to transition from internal combustion engine cars to EVs. So it's both legislation, but also being very hands-on in terms of the new technologies that are coming to market. This is one. The second aspect, which is relevant to all different types of technologies, it's the cost. Several things are in China and also in other countries relatively close to China, like Indonesia and others, where you have certain battery minerals that you have to put in the electrodes, are cheaper to produce versus in other places. But it's not only that, they have a very large processing capacity. So even if they don't mine, for example, certain minerals in China, they have big capacity for certain power plants to do the processing and go until the stage they're battery grade. We can discuss more specifically the type of minerals, but this is maybe for another discussion.
I like to double click on that because it's definitely something that even on the green spectrum of the society, people are trying to point in that direction and saying that EVs and especially the battery production of it and extracting all of those rare earth minerals are really creating a lot of like damage and have a strong impact on the environment. So what should be done in a way to make that process maybe greener and more sustainable? Is there any opportunities to do that, or are we already in terms of innovation at the best that could be done? Have you identified any maybe solution that are getting to market or should go in terms of like really in a way decreasing that impact?
The first thing that has to be done, and it's being done today, is that batteries should have passports. So the same way that we have humans, we have passports, batteries should have passports as well. What I mean is that when a car manufacturer purchases certain batteries from a big battery manufacturer and then put it inside their vehicles, doesn't matter the brand. They need to be able to track, for example, what is the carbon footprint of a certain battery? How many tons of a certain mineral have been placed? And this is where the market is going. So I think we're very close into an area that batteries will have passports, and it's really important to increase the level of transparency. In general, when you think about markets, as you increase the levels of transparency, new players can come along, more capital can be injected, and there is a better ecosystem for new innovation. So this is number one. Two, there is new technologies that are being introduced that have a much lower carbon footprint, so they don't involve emissions. For example, if we talk about the battery minerals that are needed both for the anode and for the cathode, there's a certain process from the time that it's taken out of earth, let's say, until it's being sold to battery manufacturers. There's many new types of chemical processes that don't involve emissions. Now it's already happening, but the market needs to be able to distinguish between different types of products and what are their carbon footprint. And products with lower carbon footprint will get a higher premium. And this is a way for the market to incentivize players, doesn't matter whether it's in the upstream or in the downstream, across the entire battery value chain, to innovate and be more sustainable.
So I like to, before closing this section and jumping into the specific of the fund, I like to double click on this really end of life battery. If you can remind us, like in average, what's the length of EV batteries in average today? And then what happened after? Like what is the I would say like process in place to recycle or keep the value of like certain minerals and elements that are part of those batteries. Sometimes, I've seen companies like looking at extracting the cells that are not working properly anymore and keeping the pack together to use that for different type of application that don't require such a long range or such a density in terms of energy storage. So can you tell us a bit more about like how can where are we at today and how can we improve that end of life like EV batteries in itself?
So when we talk about batteries and electrification, we have to also talk about battery recycling, as you're saying, because many of those batteries are going to reach end of life after a certain number of years. It's still being tested how many exact number of years. Some say 10, some say 15. It's difficult to give an exact number. But what do we do with those batteries at the end of life? We don't want to create a huge waste, Everybody talks about circularity. So we have to be able to take those batteries at their end of life, take them through a process that is friendly to the environment, so with a low carbon footprint, and bring them back into the supply chain. So let's go back into the structure of a battery. Within a battery, the most expensive part is the cathode. Within the cathode, you have minerals. So let's talk, for example, in NMC, you have nickel, manganese, cobalt. Each one of those minerals are quite expensive to extract, to take them through a process so they're battery grade. So when we think about battery recycling, it's mostly concentrated, also lithium and others, but it's mostly concentrated around separating, disassembling the battery, shredding it, creating a black mass, but also taking them through a process. There's certain ways to do it. Some require heating, but this involves emissions. Other through a chemical process with a much lower carbon footprint to extract those battery minerals, mostly from the cathode, and sell it back to either cathode manufacturers, precursors, battery manufacturers, in order to create this type of circularity. So this is extremely important. We've seen big announcements in American companies, startups that have raised big sums of money from big players. The same is starting to happen in Europe, but it's very important to create local hubs. So these battery recycling plants have to be close to big car manufacturers and big battery manufacturers. You want to cut transportation cost, but also the emissions involving in transportation.
If you look at the battery EV productions today, like what is the actual percentage of batteries that are actually recycled? And I mean, as of today, is that this all recycling process makes sense financially speaking, or are we still at a very early stage and therefore the cost of recycling and extracting all of those minerals are still very expensive?
We're still at the beginning from the transition from internal combustion engine cars to electric vehicles. So many of those batteries haven't reached their end of life because we don't have enough electric vehicles on the road. Excuse me. So this is one, it's important to remember. But in terms of legislation, and the European Union is talking about it publicly, and others are doing as well, sorry. But many of them will require in the future, for example, by the end of the decade, that 20% of batteries will contain recycled content. So this will give very strong incentives to battery manufacturers and other players in the supply chain to use recycled content. Yes, to go back to your question, the cost is higher today, but as we'll see more innovation and more capital and more purpose-driven founders thinking about solving those problems, the cost will go down. As the demand will go up, the cost will go down. I think we're only at the beginning of the electrification revolution.
So to close this section, so we mentioned and we touched upon the recycling part of it, but what is the potential for batteries are not maybe suitable for EVs anymore, but do you see any other application where those battery cells could be repurposed and used? And is it something that have you identified maybe some companies doing that, or what's the potential of the market as investors if you look at that or not?
So there's other applications. When we talk about batteries, it's not just for electric vehicles. For example, stationary storage. So the grid today, as we're going to transition from fossil fuel, so from coal and oil and natural gas towards renewables like wind and solar, which is also, it's unbelievable. Huh? The cost of wind and solar went down 70 and 90% respectively in the past 10 years. Today, on a per kilowatt hour, wind and solar are cheaper than fossil fuel. So it's only going to continue, and we're only going to use more renewables in the grid, then we're going to face what is called the intermittency problem. Because the wind doesn't blow all the time, and unfortunately it's not sunny all the time, as we can see here outside in the UK where I live. So batteries and other technologies can be quite significant in allowing us to store energy in order to use afterwards. But when we speak about long energy storage duration, then batteries might be a bit more tricky, because again, it goes back to the energy density. You might need to use many battery cells, many of them, and then the cost will not make sense. So there's different startups who, one, are exploring batteries for stationary storage, but there's others who are trying to use other different types of technologies where they think the energy density will be higher and therefore the storing capabilities will be better.
Thank you so much for sharing all of those valuable insights. So let's go into the specific of Nomea. Can you tell us a bit more about like the story and the genesis of it, and what was the initial gap that you saw in the market that led to the thesis behind Nomea investment?
I've always been very passionate about technologies and about innovation. And I mean, I'm not just a techno-optimist who thinks that innovation can solve it all, because let me be very direct and say innovation is not enough in order to reach net zero. Climate change is a multifaceted challenge that we have to face from many different angles. But myself personally, I've always loved reading about different types of scientific research, new technologies, whether they're going to be economically viable or not, what are their stage. And now, specifically in climatech, it's not just talking about whether they're commercially viable or not. It's whether they can cut emissions at scale. So these are the two leading parameters that we look at Nomea. So we're looking at the emissions reductions potential. And two, of course, we're a climatech fund, so we're looking also to generate outstanding returns to our investors. So we're looking on the commercial viability of the products.
So in terms of like founders, and you mentioned like what are the criteria that you are looking at, but if you can tell us like what do you offer to the founders that you invest in besides capital, and how do you find those founders? How do you source those incredible team?
So we offer more than capital, as you're saying. We can get quite involved. Again, we're not going to impose ourselves, so it also depends on the founding team and what they're looking for. So we're quite open in our discussions with our portfolio companies, and we ask them, what do you need? How can we be helpful to you guys? Sometimes the answer is strategy or product or hiring. Today we see an amazing wave of talent that is coming to climatech. Many second-time founders that have been very successful in other domains, like fintech, cyber, and others, are now pursuing a career in climatech. Unbelievable. Makes me very happy. So we help them recruiting people, because talent is very important. We help them with fundraising. We have very strong strategic relationships with other climatech funds, and we're big believers in collaboration. So we like to bring other funds who bring a different type of skill set, a different type of value proposition to the table. And we try and do our best to be founder-centric. So it's a lot about the needs of the founders and how we can be as helpful as possible.
So according to you, like which sectors are the most promising for you today in terms of what I call ICR or impact cash return? I mean, meaning building impactful companies while creating highly profitable business. Do you see any underdogs or subsectors of the ecosystem that you guys are looking at right now and you're specifically excited about?
Absolutely. Maybe it will be easier if I will give you two examples from our portfolio companies. just to give you some insights into what get us excited and what type of innovation we're looking to invest in. And then I'm happy to share also other views about other verticals and sectors that we're doing certain deep dives.
Yeah, definitely. Let's do it.
So one investment that we've announced quite recently is an Israeli company that is called First Airborne. So they provide remote, automated airborne services to both on and offshore wind turbines. So we all know that wind energy is responsible for about 6-7% of total electricity in 2020. I don't know the updated numbers, but the trends are clear, right? Shifting away from fossil fuels towards renewables. And what their cutting edge IP allows, it allows developers to track the performance of each one of their wind turbine with real-time data and no additional cost. So in a world where turbines are getting taller and taller and blades are reaching 140 meters, if you can have this type of technology that gives you both predictive maintenance and inspection and gives you a constant flow of information, it had a big edge. So we've invested in First Airborne. They've scaled very nicely. They've signed major contracts in Europe quite recently, and we work quite closely with them. So this is a space optimizing renewable energy, and these types of platforms we find very exciting and interesting. Another very quick example of one of our portfolio companies is ClimateCrop. ClimateCrop's technology is remarkable. What they do, they enhance the ability of crops to absorb sunlight and grow faster, store more energy and therefore more carbon, and produce higher yields. So in reality, what they do, they really unlock the full potential of photosynthesis. And it's been powered by decades of R&D in the Weizmann Institute, also in Israel, and they've generated outstanding results. So they've been able to increase the yield of crops like potatoes, tomatoes, canola by between 25, 30 to 90%. I mean, unheard of, remarkable. And in a world where 50% of all habitable land is dedicated to agriculture, 50%, think about it, unbelievable. So if you can produce more on a per hectare basis, it's extremely important. So these are two examples, but we're interested in many other things.
Yeah, any other last subsector or subcategories that kind of is overlooked and no one is really looking at it right now, and that you think there is tremendous potential?
So we spoke a little bit about batteries and battery recycling, and I don't want to be too repetitive. We've done a deep dive into different types of carbon removal technologies. This is maybe one of the most hype areas in climate tech today. So technologies that can suck CO2 out of the atmosphere and either store it underground or go through a certain process and sell it to different people, different companies. So we've done a deep dive into CDR. We think it's very interesting. And again, the fundamental thesis here is that reaching net zero also means being able to remove a few gigatons of CO2 equivalent every year. So there's certain areas in our economy that might take us a bit more time as a civilization to decarbonize, areas that are hard to abate, like heavy industry, production of cement, steel, very complex processes, long-haul transportation. So that's why carbon removals are very important. This is one example, but we look quite a lot on ag and food, alternative proteins. There's many different subsectors that we think are very interesting, and we see many new innovations. There's really we're always amazed and inspired by the level of innovation and creativity of founders and entrepreneurs.
So, as I was mentioning to you at the beginning of the talk, is we love to hear what you guys are excited about, but also kind of at the contrario, what do you see passing by your desk or your screen of project that you think in a way don't make sense in terms of like climate impact or potentials. If you have maybe one or two examples without naming any companies of subsectors or categories that you don't believe in right now?
Wow, okay, that's a loaded question. I will say, I will name maybe a few areas that we're less involved in, and we have our own reasoning and logic. One is the intersection between crypto and blockchain and climatech. I assume I'm going to upset some of your listeners right now, but I'll give a few reasons why. First of all, I have no problem with it, subject that it brings additional capital into climate. If it's capable of unlocking additional capital into climate, then obviously I'm in favor of that. But second, I don't think that blockchain or certain applications will be able to decarbonize our economy like so many individuals and new papers that I see are produced every day. Maybe it can play a certain role in carbon markets, whether a decentralized approach can be valuable, but I think in other areas we'll actually have to build certain things and transition into different types of technologies. So this is one. The second thing is we don't invest in micromobility. So transportation accounts for about 16% of total greenhouse gases. Unbelievable the amount of capital that is going into micromobility. Now, I'm not saying that scooters or different types of solutions are not better than cars. I'm just saying that in Nomea, we think that we can have a bigger climate impact in other sectors. On top of it, and this is really to finish up, but on top of it, if we spoke about battery recycling, then it's with micromobility, you might have quite a substantial waste problem at the end of life. And this is something that we've all witnessed in certain cities where we walk by.
So speaking about impact, I mean, how do you measure impact? Some funds are putting out there that we invest only on companies who have the potential to remove like X gigaton by 2050 or 2030. I mean, do you have any criteria and specific process or framework that you guys are using? I mean, do you rely on scientists and experts to validate the potential impact of those technologies that are often very early stage or early stage that you look at to base your investment decision?
Absolutely. So in certain cases, and especially when we enter new markets, we use third parties and experts or professors that can help us, one, calculate the climate impact, the emissions reduction potential, the impact on biodiversity, and many other things, because climatech, it's a lot about emissions reductions, but there's also things that go beyond that. And second, those experts also help us internally go through a certain due diligence process to validate the technology and the ability to commercialize this at scale. We, first of all, as part of our screening process, when we speak with startups, we send them a questionnaire. And in this questionnaire, this is our first, let's say, filter to be able to understand what they think is their emissions reduction potential, what is the problem that they're trying to solve, what is the size of the market, so what's the sources of emissions within the market that they're tackling. And then internally, at the first step, we make some assumptions of, for example, what at scale, what penetration rate can this company and technology reach at a given market. And this gives us a very preliminary understanding of the climate impact potential of a company. As we progress in the due diligence process, we have a certain framework. But to go back to your question, we're looking for climate tech companies that at scale can reduce emissions by at least 100 million tons of CO2 equivalent. This is ambitious, and we recognize this, but we're looking for ambitious founders who are trying to solve big problems.
So what's next for Nomea Investment?
What's next for us? That's a question that I ask myself quite often as well. I think it's one, helping our portfolio companies scale. I enjoy speaking with the founders that we back. They get me excited. They always remind me why I do what I do at Nomea. So this is always very energizing. Second is finding exciting companies to invest in. And we speak about companies, technologies, but at the end of the day, it's all about people. And we're looking to invest with people that we think we can go a certain journey with them and be as helpful as we can, because as startups and founders and entrepreneurs, it's not easy. And there's many ups and downs, and this journey can seem at times the best thing and the best decision that you've made, and at other times it can be quite dark. So we're going to be there for them in both the ups and the downs, and good and in bad. We're probably going to raise another fund at some point later on, maybe in a year and a half, but this will have to be determined. And
So last question that I have on my side is more a personal question, but what's your view on the climate crisis? I mean, as I always ask, are we doomed? And what would you say to people who can feel demoralized by all the terrible news that we keep hearing and the visible consequences that we have almost on our daily life now?
we have very good reasons to be concerned about climate change and take it very seriously, and make sure that world leaders all over the world take it as seriously as we do. But if you're asking me, are we doomed? Not at all. I'm an optimist by nature. I have immense trust and confidence in human nature and in our ability to innovate and also come together as a society and find solutions. Now, again, innovation alone is not enough. From politics to legislation to advocacy groups, every person needs to play his part in order to accelerate global decarbonization. But I get so much inspiration from founders who are thinking about the next generation of technologies that will enable this global decarbonization. So I don't think we're doomed at all. I'm very optimistic about the future. I think the world that we live at today is probably the best world that every human has ever lived at. You look at the average life expectancy of humans, the number of people who now have access to education, the percentage of the global population who now live in extreme poverty is down significantly in the past decades. We've been able as a civilization to come up with so many innovative cures to diseases that nobody have thought before that we will be able to cure. So yes, I think that climate change is the biggest challenge of our generation, but I believe we can fix it. I believe it's an investment opportunity that amounts to trillions of dollars. And I also believe that we have a moral obligation to do that.
So how can the community of founders, LPs, experts listening to the show can help you?
We're always interested in having discussions with different types of players, whether it's investors, LPs, companies, ecosystem players. So this is first of all. Second, in terms of companies that are fundraising, early stage or late stage, we would love to hear from you. You can always reach out to us via our website. There's a certain process for founders and also for investors. As I said before, we'll probably be fundraising at a certain point in the future. So we're always happy to speak and share our thoughts about climate tech and the landscape. And most importantly, it's about driving change. So it's about just having those conversations, engaging in debate. We don't have to agree about everything. I'm a big believer of sharing ideas. Even if you think A and I think B, I'd be always happy to discuss and hear your view, and I'd be happy to share mine.
Any question I should have asked you and that I did not for this first part of the interview?
No, I think nothing that I can think of right now.
Thank you so much, Nadav, for your time, incredible insights, and really all this effort and energy that you put to support climate tech founders and helping them to build a better and cleaner world. So thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you very much, Guillaume. It's been a pleasure.
Hi, it's Guillaume again. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show. As I said, do not hesitate to share an episode with a friend. Also, if you value the work we do for the climate tech ecosystem, here is how you can contribute to it. Today, I'm asking for your support and a donation or sponsorship to make the work of our self-funded team more viable. Even a small contribution means a lot to us. In any case, I will invite you to subscribe to our channels and visit our website startupbasecamp.org to discover more episodes like this one. And get your membership to access all our members' exclusive content. So remember, all of this is possible because of your support and donation. And we want you to be part of this collective movement against climate change. Let's keep in touch, and I hope you will enjoy our next show with us.